Cosmos, GOES, INSAT, Nadezhda, NOAA. The names of these Earth-orbiting satellites may be unfamiliar, but their impact on our lives is enormous. From their vantage point high in space, they monitor weather systems or receive and transmit voice, data, and images worldwide. These satellites also have another important but lesser-known function: saving lives. On board, they carry instruments that detect and relay emergency distress signals originating from any point on the planet.
Having satellites are like having eyes in the sky, literally in space. Having these eyes in space can pick up signals or emergency beacons several times a day.
People in distress. The difference between life and death is often time. Every minute, every hour, every day, these satellites have quickly located shipwrecks, downed aircraft, and other emergencies, and have bought time for the survivors. It is real-life search and rescue drama that has played out successfully over 3,000 times and saved over 10,000 lives worldwide.
Satellites orbit at 850 kilometers above the Earth. During their many successive orbits, they cover all the planet. Therefore, the surface observed is much larger, the coverage is global, and the monitoring is constant.
The constellation of satellites that picks up these distress alerts and notifies search and rescue authorities is called COSPAS-SARSAT.
COSPAS-SARSAT started in 1979 as a cooperative program between 4 agencies in Canada, France, the USA, and USSR. The objective of the program was the development of a satellite system for assisting search and rescue services by providing distress alerting and location information.
It was the mid-70s. Scientists began to explore the use of satellites in space to monitor distress signals and determine the beacon position. The advantage being its potential for making SAR resources more timely, efficient, and effective.
COSPAS-SARSAT came about because the US and Russia, after the Apollo-Soyuz mission, were looking for other ways to cooperate in space. Since this mission was humanitarian, it was search and rescue related, it was easy for the two countries to try to work together and develop the system. We actually were able to track each other's satellite, and information was freely exchanged between the two countries. This was a significant milestone during the Cold War.
The COSPAS-SARSAT initiative would make history as the first space-based international agreement to be driven totally by the principle of non-discriminatory humanitarian service, free of charge for the victim in distress.
Various people were skeptical about any kind of cooperation between the East and the West, and this program, because it was really a humanitarian system, everyone involved in it was certainly interested in pursuing the goals of that operation, and that's I think that led to the success of the system overall.
I don't know any other program of such kind which was developed in the Cold War years, and it continued now for more than 15 years.
On June 30th, 1982, Cosmos 1383 was launched from Plesetsk in northern Russia. It would be the first satellite to carry COSPAS-SARSAT technology as part of its payload. Within 40 days, this experiment would chalk up its first success. September 9th, 1982, a single-engine Cessna, piloted by Joel Ziegelheim, flew a search pattern over the Rocky Mountains in northern British Columbia, Canada. He and his 2 passengers were searching for an aircraft that had vanished more than 7 weeks before. Suddenly, Ziegelheim's plane, unable to lift above the unexpectedly steep rising valley floor of a canyon, crashed into the trees. What happened next would make history and launch search and rescue into the space age.
They'd gone out and done an initial search without any luck, and Ziegelheim was reported overdue. So I was called in to see if we could use the satellite system to help. So I came in and got it set up to track satellite passes in the western fringes, which it was. We only had the one tracking station operating at that time. in Ottawa. So to pick up something in British Columbia was sort of at the extreme limits of the system. So I came in, checked the satellite schedule, and made sure everything was working, the communications and so on. And of course, when the pass occurred in the middle of the night, the data was automatically forwarded to RCC Victoria, and they reacted to it, I believe it was the next morning.
At 2 a.m. Pacific Time, Russia's Kospas-1 satellite picked up a 121.5 megahertz distress signal in the Rocky Mountains.
We proceeded out to the lat and long they give us, and we're approximately about 10 miles away from the crash site, and we picked up a DLT, and then we circled around, and that's, I spotted the tent and the casualties, and that's when we jumped in. We landed right by where the survivors were, and it was a matter of feet. We were right on target, both of us. Well, I think we had fractures of the lower limbs, broken ribs, facial lacerations, and shock. So they were in bad shape.
The single-engine plane had crashed 80 kilometers, 50 miles off its intended flight path, and well out of what would have been the prime search area.
If it wasn't for the Kospas satellite, it would have took us maybe anywhere from 3 to 4 days, maybe a week to find the survivors. And if we had waited that long, the type of injuries they did have, there probably would have been some deaths. You know, they wouldn't have made it.
Finding Ziegelheim and his passengers dramatically proved the effectiveness of satellite technology for search and rescue. By the time the formal intergovernmental Kospas-SARSAT agreement was signed in Paris on July 1, 1988, the system had already been the primary emergency alerting system in over 450 cases, with 1,000 people saved. This agreement ensured that the space segment would be available long-term for alert and location services.
Ships can no longer sink with no alert going out. Vessels with 406 megahertz beacon with a hydrostatic release can at least have an automatic distress alert transmitted.
In the earlier days before satellite technology, the search and rescue forces would respond when somebody was reported overdue, but they had no idea where a distress would have taken place, so the person could have drifted thousands of miles. With a satellite beacon, you know right away where the distress is taking place, and you have a very accurate position to respond to. So it has actually reduced the effort, and it's taken the search out of search and rescue.
There are two major groups of satellites that carry Kospas-SARSAT equipment. One type, low Earth orbiting satellites known as LEOs, circle the poles in near space at altitudes of up to 1,000 kilometers. The American-built LEO satellites, known by the acronym SARSAT, carry two instruments that listen for Kospas-SARSAT emergency distress beacons. One is a search and rescue repeater, or SAR, provided by Canada. It receives and redirects 121.5 megahertz analog signals and 406 megahertz digital signals back to Earth. The second is a search and rescue processor, or SARP, provided by France. The SARP is able to process 406 megahertz digital signals to include additional information, like time and frequency. It then replays the enhanced 406 megahertz distress message back every 3 minutes to ensure that it gets received by a ground station on Earth. Similar emergency beacon detection instruments are carried on board Russia's Kospas series, low Earth orbiting satellites. Because LEO satellites are in motion relative to the Earth, the location of an emergency beacon can easily be determined by using a phenomenon called the Doppler effect. The Doppler effect is based on the principle that there is a change in pitch of a sound wave from high to low as the source of the sound wave moves towards us, passes directly in front of us, and then fades away in the distance. Similarly, satellites hear the shift in the pitch or frequency of an activated beacon.
As the satellite is approaching, the frequency drops down. As it goes by, that tells us when we were the closest to it, and then it carries on and eventually levels off. The inflection point, or the point where
where the satellite is passing closest by is what we refer to as the time of closest approach.
The time of closest approach can be determined once the frequency shift is plotted onto what is called the Doppler curve. Doppler curve calculations are then translated into degrees of latitude and longitude.
It's 4427.9.
It is the key to determining where a beacon has been activated.
7610.2.
A second group of satellites, introduced in the early 90s, is also used for search and rescue. These satellites, such as the US GOES series, India's INSAT system, as well as satellite constellations from other countries, are called geostationary. Geostationary satellites move in orbit above the Earth, synchronized to a fixed point on the surface. They are positioned over the equator, moving in the same direction as the Earth's rotation, at altitudes of about 36,000 kilometers. Each geosatellite sees about 1/3 of the Earth's surface. These geostationary satellites carry SAR repeaters on board and detect only 406 megahertz signals. Although LEO satellites and geosatellites perform differently, each provides benefits to search and rescue.
The two systems are complementary. The geosatellites are fixed over they're fixed over a portion of the world. Even though we don't have a position, the beacons have a unique ID which we can link to a database, so we have information about the owner, the operator of the vessel or the aircraft. That allows search and rescue forces to start their response earlier, and then this initial alert can be substantiated later when we have a low Earth orbiting satellite come over the beacon and give us a Doppler position.
In many cases, the COSPAS-SARSAT satellite system is the last resort and only hope for people involved in air, land, or sea incidents to alert search and rescue authorities about their plight.
Imaginons, nous à bord d'un bateau.
Imagine you're on a ship, a small vessel, crossing the Atlantic. Then, in the middle of the ocean, for whatever reason, you have to abandon ship. So, here you are, thousands of kilometers from land, alone in the water. There is only one system capable of finding you. That system is COSPAS-SARSAT.
COSPAS-SARSAT system data is used on average on about one real distress and safety incident each day. Emergency distress beacons are in effect portable radio transmitters designed solely to send out an SOS or distress alert on an emergency frequency.
Nothing so far.
Their use dates back to the 60s, when military planes began carrying early versions on board as part of their survival gear. Within 10 years, this practice had spread to civilian aircraft.
In distress, these could be activated, and an overflying aircraft or another vessel might be able to pick up the distress signal and come to the rescue. But that was very much by luck, whether someone else happened to be passing in the vicinity and to hear your distress signal.
There are three types of beacons: ELTs, or emergency locator transmitters, which are found on aircraft; EPIRBs, emergency position indicating radio beacons, for use on maritime vessels; and PLBs, personal locator beacons, for land applications. All of them transmit on a frequency of either 121.5 megahertz or 406 megahertz.
Well, the accuracy depends on the type of beacon you have. For 121.5 beacons, the older beacons, the accuracy is generally good to 12 to 20 kilometers. For searchers, if you had an accuracy of 20 kilometers, you'd have to search an area the size of a city, so it's a large search area. If you're searching for a 406 beacon, which has an accuracy of 2 to 5 kilometers, the search area corresponds to maybe a neighborhood in a city, so it's a much smaller area.
There are over 600,000 121.5 megahertz distress beacons in use around the world. But these beacons have some severe limitations.
121.5 megahertz is the older of two technologies that are used. It's an analog technology, and it is It's going to go away someday because of the problems we've had with it.
The 121.5 megahertz frequency triggers a false alert 98% of the time. This sometimes means delays in SAR response time of several hours, as mission control centers try to verify its authenticity with a second satellite pass.
There are many, many other things out there that look like 121.5 beacons. We've heard stories, pizza ovens, ATM machine putting off the signal, looking like a 121.5 distress signal. In the United States, for example, we get 400 or 500 of these signals a day coming through the system, and obviously they're not all distress signals.
The 121.5 megahertz frequency is scheduled to be phased out of satellite processing in 2009. 406 megahertz, on the other hand, is a dedicated search and rescue frequency. It is a digitally encoded signal designed specifically for satellite detection.
Encoded in that digital signal is a unique number, unique to that particular beacon. And if that beacon is registered, as is mandatory in the United States and many, many other countries, one can correlate the owner of that beacon, a telephone number to call, and so on and so forth, a type of boat it might be on, a type of aircraft it might be on, and get an understanding by a phone call of whether real distress is occurring or not.
There are hundreds of thousands of 406 megahertz beacons in use. These numbers are expected to jump drastically as the 121.5 megahertz satellite system is phased out. In addition, advancements in beacon design have led to the development of 406 beacons which can include latitude and longitude in their coded signal. This is done using a GPS receiver within the beacon or from information accessed through an external source. These are known as location protocol beacons. This position information is sent when the beacon's distress signal is activated. On April 5th, 1999, Claude Bistoquet learned the true value of his 406 megahertz emergency beacon. While crossing the Atlantic, en route from Florida to France, his trimaran, the Acapella, caught in a storm with 50-foot seas and 60 to 70 knot winds, suddenly capsized. He and crewman François Forestier found themselves 650 nautical miles off Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and in desperate trouble.
There was no way for them to signal for help, even though they had all of the latest electronic equipment on board. But what they did have on board was a 406 megahertz EPIRB. Using this system, we were able to nail down the time and the place. We knew where they were, we knew when they lit off that beacon, when it was picked up by the satellite, we knew the name and full description of the vessel, and by the time we were able to talk with their family, how many people were on board, their experience level, the fact that it was a watertight compartment, and all this other information. When we arrived on scene, we deployed both rescue swimmers into this 25-foot seas. They swam to the capsized vessel. The two personnel popped the hatch, the two French citizens. They climbed out, very cooperative. They were both harnessed up, one after the other, lifted up to the helo, and then both rescue swimmers, we did a dual hoist with both rescue swimmers, which we don't normally do, but given the short time frame we had. And this whole evolution took 16 minutes. From there, we flew back to the Naval Air Station in Canada, where an ambulance awaited, and took these two to the hospital for evaluation. They had mild to moderate hypothermia, and otherwise were in very good condition. And so, as we say in the cost-best SARSAT and search and rescue business, 2 lives saved.
When satellites receive an emergency distress signal, it is downlinked or rerouted back to an Earth station called a LUT, or local user terminal, in its field of view. There are 2 types of LUTs, LEO LUTs and GEO LUTs. Both are designed to receive cost-best SARSAT satellite signals, and both contain processing equipment to read emergency beacon signals.
The basic difference in the two are the LEO LUTs track satellites, moving satellites, and the GEO LUTs track a stationary satellite, which means that they basically are fixed much like a satellite dish on your for watching TV. So as the satellite comes across the horizon, the LEO LUTs are programmed with orbit vectors to know which satellite it is and where to look for the satellite.
GeoLUTs, on the other hand, are in constant contact with the geosatellites, since these satellites are in a fixed position above the Earth. Any activated 406 beacon alerts are received instantaneously. In total, there are over 40 LEO-LUT and GeoLUT ground receiving stations located across all continents, stretching from Fairbanks, Alaska to Wellington, New Zealand, and from Arkhangelsk, Russia to Santiago, Chile.
Once a beacon is activated, and frequently they're automatically activated, it goes up through the satellite, down to the ground station, into the Mission Control Center, and out to an RCC. And in the case of the U.S. in particular, that's the first time it gets touched by human hands. It's all automated all the way through.
Mission Control Centers, or MCCs, are the nerve centers of Cospas-Sarsat. There are over 20 Mission Control Centers, or MCCs, located strategically around the world.
The personnel involved at the MCC are mainly to monitor and make sure that communication links are up, and also respond to any messages that they might get for additional information from the search and rescue authorities.
They can certainly give us all the information we need to start a search and rescue mission. They give us the identification of the vessel, they give us the position of the vessel, they give us the satellite that detected the alert in the first place, they give us the time, they give us the confidence in the alert that was passed down from the satellite. So we have a maximum amount of information with which to start a search and rescue mission.
Once RCCs are notified, the role of Cospas-Sarsat ends and search and rescue begins. August 1st, 1998. Simon Marsden, an Australian from Hobart, Tasmania, was out on a 10-day solo hike north of Kimmeroot on Baffin Island, in the Arctic region of Canada, when he came face to face with a terrifying sight: a female polar bear and two nearly full-grown cubs.
I put my head down and I lifted my head up just a few seconds later, and I could see that the mother was already starting to come down on her side of the river, and the cubs were following her. Obviously, if I just stayed put, then that was it. I was going to be their dinner straight away. So I had to try. I found myself down the bottom of another creek and started rummaging through my pack and decided, right, I'll give this thing a go, and let's see what happens. So I hadn't used it before. I imagine the majority of people that own such a thing haven't used them before. It's just a essential insurance policy for them.
RCC Halifax received a 121.5 megahertz signal originating from the eastern Arctic. In Canada, 121.5 megahertz beacons are intended for use only on aircraft, so the RCC believed the signal was from an aircraft ELT. They had no way of knowing that this was an Australian-made personal locator beacon, which also transmits on the same frequency. The RCC tasked Kasara Iqaluit, a member of Canada's Volunteer Civil Air Search and Rescue Association, to locate the source of the emergency beacon.
They asked for us to go out to the coordinates that they had available and to find out whatever we could. But there was a mystery. There were no aircraft that were overdue. There were no open flight plans or flight notes. And in checking with Iqaluit Airport, there was no indication that there were any aircraft anywhere near the site that was involved.
They found no sign of an aircraft, but were still picking up the beacon signal. As they followed it, they spotted a hiker running along the bank of the Sulphur River.
When we flew over him, that all we saw was a man, frankly, waving his arms up in the air and trying to get our attention on the plane and to get us down on the ground as soon as possible.
They soon understood why. Casara spotter Jerry Itok caught sight of a polar bear and her cub not far from the hiker, and the pair were slowly closing in.
I seen a bear and a cub up on the hill downriver that apparently was on his side of the river too, so the polar bear with a cub is quite dangerous.
Because the Twin Otter had tundra tires, the pilot figured he could put his plane down safely in the valley. But it would be the opposite side of the river from where the victim was running for his life. Once the plane was down, the flight crew began rigging a rescue line to help the victim safely cross the river. He did not need it. Fear propelled him into the icy water without hesitation.
All right. He was quite tired and just happy to see us when we got to him.
He was immediately flown back to Iqaluit, shook up but safe. He had crossed 11 kilometers of rough tundra in under 3 hours to elude the polar bears. He survived through determination, luck, and the foresight to carry a personal locator beacon.
Simon is clearly in good health today because he took those early precautions and because the whole system worked together to solve his problem.
Since the International COSPAS-SARSAT program agreement was signed in 1988, the 4 original parties of the agreement have been joined by over 30 participating countries. Although not space segment providers, these countries make recommendations on COSPAS-SARSAT policy and future developments for the program.
Are there any questions?
And before we had the satellite system, it could take up to 24 hours before a search and rescue center could be notified of a distress. With the satellites, this time, and in particular with the use of geostationary satellites and the complementary use of the GPS positioning system, this time has been reduced to a few minutes, sometimes less than 2 minutes, and it seems to me a very significant improvement. For the future, we would also like to concentrate our attention at developing new technologies for reducing the cost of the 4 or 6 MHz beacon. This would allow a larger number of users, new categories of users, to avail themselves of the benefits of the system.
COSPAS-SARSAT will continue to improve its alerting and locating system to minimize SAR response time and maximize a victim's chances for survival. At the same time, they will remain true to their original humanitarian ideals, to provide access to the system to all states on a non-discriminatory basis and free of charge for the end user in distress. In other words, do all they can to save lives.